So it's imperative for Russia to try and crack on. They're still probably 10 kilometers away, and there is a chance that Pokrovsk itself would become another Bakhmut, and
Yes.
that would just churn through the Russians again.
Time to invite you into our briefing room where we can get the thoughts of one of our leading tactical and strategic thinkers. A Russian missile attack has hit the central Ukrainian city of Poltava earlier today. It's seen as the deadliest strike since the start of the invasion over 2 years ago. Meanwhile, President Putin is on a visit to Mongolia, despite an international arrest warrant being issued against the Russian leader for alleged war crimes, and Mongolia being a member of the International Criminal Court. He seems to be, well, had the red carpet rolled out for him. Let's talk to Major General Chip Chapman, former senior British military advisor, former head of counterterrorism at the Ministry of Defence. Welcome back to the show, to you, Chip.
Good evening, John.
Can I talk about what's going on, Chip, on the ground in Ukraine now? I mean, we saw the news of that missile strike a little earlier on today, and I know you've been following the battle map. You'll have been following the Ukrainian incursion into Russia in the Kursk region, while Russia keeps pressing on in the Donbass. When you look at it all and put it all together with your strategic eye, where do you see the balance of advantage in what's going on?
Well, I think we've still got an equalisation of the battlefield, but if I was to be absolutely honest, and of course I always am in terms of not trying to have any optimism bias or groupthink or any of those things which analysts don't like, this would be the worst moment I've seen for a long time in terms of the Pokrovsk axis, where the pace of the Russian attack seems to be picking up. There was a lot of nonsense in February when people said that Avdiivka was operational and strategic importance. It wasn't, but that opened the gateway towards Pokrovsk. It was 50 kilometers away. They're now only 10 kilometers away and eating their way into the main defensive area of the Ukrainians. That doesn't mean that they'll be defeated or there'll be a breakthrough, but I've said many times using a Russian proverb that the chicken pecks grain by grain. The chicken seems to be getting bigger and he's got more of an appetite. So they need to stabilize that, because the importance of that place is that it's a key logistic hub, both for rail and road.
Yeah.
If that is lost, then the whole of potentially the southern part of Donetsk collapses as well. There's only other one place you can resupply, that's Kramatorsk, and it's only 20 kilometers away from another oblast, Dnipropetrovsk. And the Russians won't stop there. And if they get a foothold somewhere else, you never know, we might get another illegal annexation of another oblast.
So, look, in your view then, Chip, with Russia closing in on Pokrovsk, this important strategic hub, the taking of all that territory in Russia, in around Kursk, has that been counterproductive? Has that just taken away the necessary Ukrainian resources they would need to defend a place like that?
I don't think it's been counterproductive. I think there's been a lot of misanalysis, really, in terms of saying that they thought that people would be taken from Donetsk to go and to go and defend Kursk. You only have to look at the battlefield geometry to know that that just was not going to happen. Firstly, the Russians have always said that their operational objectives is Pokrovsk, so they're not going to take people away from their main effort. Secondly, the battlefield geometry is such that Kursk is a long, long way from Donetsk. You've got Belgorod and the Luhansk between it. So they are taking people from other areas, particularly in Kharkiv, but they were never going to take people away from that. Now, at the moment, I would assess that what the Ukrainians are doing in Kursk to be a risk, not a gamble. A risk is something that you can recover from. A gamble is something you cannot. So firstly, they need to stabilize the lines in Donetsk. And secondly, in Kursk, they will seize and maintain places as there. They won't seize and hold everything, because that would be stupid to do, purely because number of square kilometers of terrain taken has no real meaning. You need to have key terrain where you can defend things. That's what they will do, because once you lose operational surprise, your inevitable incursions slowed down. That's exactly what happens in these things. And that's exactly why you then flip the coin and say that should have been happening with the Russians and seems not to be in the Pokrovsk region.
Right. So if the incursion into Kursk hasn't been as it were, the decisive moment, the redefining moment, what about the need for longer range missiles? I was talking to our colleague Zach Anders earlier on. He was saying that the possibility of getting hold of some of those air-to-ground American cruise missiles, that could be such a difference as to make Pokrovsk just turn that picture around so Pokrovsk could be saved by Ukraine. Do you share that analysis?
Not in the short term, and the reason for that is all to do with timeliness. Now, those JSAMs, the Joint Air Surface to Standoff Missile, firstly need to be integrated into the Ukrainian aircraft. Probably will be on the F-16, which won't be a problem. But secondly, they're not an A package yet, so they're not likely to be there for probably a number of months. That is not the time frame that we're looking at in the area of Donetsk. So once it arrives, yes, it might well have a great impact in terms of the ability to push back the Russian staging areas and supply depots. That complicates their missions in the future. But the short term is they must hold. Now, they haven't got very long to try and achieve what they're trying to achieve in the Donetsk region because, it's only a few more weeks of campaigning before we'll have the mud again when the autumn will bring the rains. So it's an imperative for Russia to try and crack on. They're still probably 10 kilometers away, and there is a chance that Pokrovsk itself would become another Bakhmut, and that would just churn through the Russians again.
And it's argued by some in this country, and certainly by Zelensky and in Kyiv, that Putin has showed his bark is much worse than his bite on all of this. He's threatened to strike back against NATO if that kind of level of escalation of supply and licensing to use missiles like in that way takes place. But he hasn't, and they don't believe for a moment that he actually would. And we can't know, Tim, and none of us here are strategic experts, but what do you think?
Well, I think you came almost close in the way you framed that to an opinion, John, but I mustn't be too harsh on you. But I'm completely with what I think was the inference of the point you were making. The most provocative thing you can have in global strategic politics is weakness. And I think we have just about, as the West, done enough to back Ukraine. But only just. We only supply the equipment, the military, the arms that they want, just when it's absolutely the last possible moment that they need it. And then we resupply at the last minute, etc., etc. There was a survey today about pride in Britain, which suggested that people weren't as proud about Britain as they were. And on the Israeli thing that we were discussing earlier, I'm very ashamed actually of our position. But on Ukraine, Britain actually has been brilliant. Yeah. Both Labour and the Conservatives. Yes. But I'm afraid that's not true of Germany. No. The kind of missiles that Ukraine wants, Germany have been incredibly slow.
And that's delivering. The SDP-led coalition.
Absolutely.
Now you've got the AfD, far right-wing party, on the rise, very opposed to strong support for Ukraine. And they got that in common with other of these populist right-wing parties who are on the rise.
Yeah, and one of the subtexts of the elections we've seen in East Germany in the last few days is I was on television earlier with Anne Applebaum, the writer on autocracy, a brilliant writer, and she was saying that Russian propaganda has actually been seeded in East Germany for a long time. They have been basically seeding in a population they're very familiar with, a part of Germany that has seen massive depopulation, and they have been basically turning East Germany, their former satellite state, into a place that was actually quite sympathetic to the Russian war aims in Ukraine. So there is a lot of manipulation of public opinion in Europe taking place by Russia. And I'm afraid Germany is a weak link in the war against Ukraine. If Trump is elected, as you know, I'm probably prefer Trump to Harris, but on the issue of Ukraine, I worry about his position. Could America become a weak link in this war ahead? I think it's a real case for British leadership to ensure that a country that is degrading one of our biggest enemies, I think it was Mitt Romney who said this, basically we're getting the degradation of one of our biggest strategic enemies on the cheap. It's a very crude way of putting it, but in terms of personnel and cost, Russia is its military capacity is basically being dismantled by Ukraine with our weapons and without our troops. And actually, that's quite a good deal, but we seem to be very reluctant participants in this war. We've always dragged into it in the last minute.